Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 714. Today, the Amateur Traveler features a nation so far off the beaten path, I had to Google it to even know that it was real. As we go to the island nation of Comoros.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Comoros. I'd like to welcome to the show Fiona Jones from Scotland, who's come to talk to us about Comoros. Fiona, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I say welcome back to the show, and some of you may realize, well, I don't remember hearing Fiona on the show before. Yes, we had one of those that we have every 3 to 4 years, a lost episode where the recording didn't work. And so Fiona is coming back to talk about Comoros again. So for you, this is new, those of you who are listening. But for Fiona and I, this is very familiar. So Fiona, you are old hat at this. Can you put Comoros on a map for us?
Sure.
Because I didn't know where it was. This is one of those things, those episodes that Fiona pitched me Comoros and I had to go Googling Comoros. What are we talking about? Is this a country? Which it is.
Yeah, it's a country. It's, well, 3 or 4, depending on how you look at it, volcanic islands. It's in the Indian Ocean, northwest of Madagascar and probably the northern part of Mozambique.
And you say 3 or 4 because there are 4 islands, but only 3 of them are Comoros.
Yeah, the whole country used to be French. When they voted for independence, then 3 of the islands voted to become independent. And the 4th island, which is Mayotte, decided that it wanted to stay with France. But I think the rest of Comoros is not terribly happy about that. But Mayotte stays resolutely French.
Excellent. And why should someone go to Comoros?
The reason we went was because our daughter was going travelling and we wanted a family holiday, and it was over the tail end of the Christmas holidays. So we wanted somewhere hot. We wanted somewhere that there would be good diving, and we wanted somewhere that maybe a little bit different, that might be a bit of an adventure. So for those reasons, we looked around, and I'd actually seen an article about unknown or unexplored islands. I think it was on TripAdvisor, and I'd seen the Comoros then, and I was quite interested. I'd also rashly said to the family that I'd do it as a bit of a surprise for them. So I thought, well, that'll give them a surprise if we go to the Comoros.
As in, I'm surprised you don't know where you are. And you mentioned it being hot, so we're right off the coast of Mozambique and Madagascar, and not that far from Tanzania, not that far from Zanzibar, which people have probably heard of. And it seems like it's kind of like Zanzibar, except with a French flair.
Yeah. We were in Zanzibar, it must be about 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And there are some similarities, but the islands are obviously much smaller. Mm-hmm. Probably poorer than Zanzibar, wealth-wise. I know Zanzibar isn't exactly a rich country, but Comoros is quite far down the kind of GDP league. But in other senses, it's got this real sort of Indian Ocean stuff. So white sand beaches, very green interiors, very kind of heavily forested interiors. So in that sense, I guess topographically, probably quite similar.
Excellent. Well, what kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
Well, what we did was to land in Grand Comoros, which I guess everybody will. I think you can probably catch a boat from the mainland, but I think just the main way for everybody to come in is going to be to fly into Grand Comoros. We landed there and we had a couple of days there. To be honest, there's not an awful lot to see in the island. I think we did what everybody did, which was to get ourselves a taxi and go on a tour around the island. It is a volcanic island. It's got an active volcano in the middle. So pretty much all you can do is drive around the outside of the island. I think there's one road that goes across the middle, but otherwise you just stick to the perimeter and you see the beaches and such like. So that's pretty much it. You can walk up to the volcano. That wasn't something that we did. There seems to be mixed reports about how you do that. I know we talked to a couple of guys who were there on holiday who were going to do that, and they'd got themselves a guide, and I think they were going to camp. And some accounts say that you've got to take a couple of days and walk up. But I've seen something else say that you can get a car or a jeep pretty close to the top and then just walk up the rest in a day. So I'm not quite sure which of those are correct. But between a tour of the island and a trip up the volcano, I suspect that's probably about it for Grand Comoros. So after we'd spent our couple of days there, we then went to Moeli, which was the island that we were going to be based for the rest of the time. And again, I think that's what a lot of people will do. Although the French island, which is Mayotte, I think would be nice to see. So if I ever find myself back there, I'd probably try and slot Mayotte into the trip.
Excellent. Well, starting in Comoros or Grand Comore, there seem to be multiple names for all of these things. It's both the Comoro Islands and Comoros. You mentioned the volcano, which I think is Mount Carthala.
I think it's Carthala, yeah.
Yeah. And that dominates the island here. So that's like 7,000 feet on an island that's, 20 miles across? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
Not even.
No, it's not even that big. I'm trying to think what the size of it is.
Yeah, about 10 miles across and 30 miles tall or something like that.
I mean, we went about halfway around the island and back across, and that took us probably about 5 or 6 hours. It was relatively slow going because the roads are pretty bad. And, we were stopping to look at beaches and things like that. So that kind of gives you an idea of the distance.
Now, you stayed in the capital city?
Yeah, we stayed in Moroni. And again, I think just about everybody that goes there is going to stay in Moroni. There's a few places to stay there. I mean, there's actually more places to stay than you might expect. But I think in terms of places that you might want to stay, there's maybe not so many. There's a couple of villas, like privately owned places that I think are well recommended. And we tried to stay in Airbnb, but there was a bit of a mix up with our booking, which actually in hindsight maybe wasn't such a bad thing. Really short notice, as in by the time we got there, we had to find somewhere else. So we went to somewhere called L'Eucalyptus, which I'd seen on Facebook. Again, that came pretty well rated on TripAdvisor and stuff like that. So we stayed there and it was great. It was really nice. So if I was going back or if anybody was going, I'd certainly recommend there. And it had air conditioning as well, which was the only time in the island we had air conditioning. So having that was a real treat. The only problem was that it was literally right under the mosque loudspeaker. So you got woken up about 5 o'clock in the morning with a call to prayer. But I quite like hearing that when I'm on holiday, because it certainly says that you're somewhere different. And if you don't have to get up, if you can just roll over and go back to sleep, it's not so bad.
Well, and that sort of gets into what the culture is of the island. You mentioned the French influence, but obviously an Islamic influence here, being on the coast of the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, it's very Islamic. It's reasonably traditional. The people dress conservatively. Most of the women had their heads covered. The men dressed quite conservatively as well.
And as I recall, you said that was more so on Gran Comore than it was on the other island.
Well, in the other island, the place that we stayed, Lacca Lodge, had its own private beach. So
right.
when we were on the beach, we could dress as we wanted. But Lacca Lodge was right beside a village, and you could go for a walk around the village. But the lodge that we stayed at were pretty clear that if you were doing that, you would be strongly advised to have your shoulders covered and be wearing something longer rather than shorts or a short skirt.
Okay.
So pretty Muslim, but certainly when you go out, you could still get a nice meal, drink, that sort of stuff. So it wasn't as hardcore Muslim as some countries that we've been. But it is a weird mix because of that sort of French influence as well. Mm-hmm. The currency is euros, which is very odd for that part of the world. The food tends to be, if you go to some of the better restaurants, the food is pretty good as well, which again, I think is probably indicative of the French, because I think anywhere that the French have been, the food tends to be reasonably good, and there are some nice bakeries and things like that too. So quite an interesting mix of cultures on the island.
Well, and you mentioned doing the tour around the island, and how did you find you said you did a taxi for that. How did you find a taxi driver to take you around?
It's really easy. There's loads of taxi drivers, and they are very keen on getting you business. We picked up a taxi at the airport. I kind of messed it up a bit because it said that it was good for you to get a local taxi driver because occasionally it can be a little bit problematic getting through customs. They're very keen on making sure that you've got things like your printed reservation. You're advised not to have just your reservation on your phone. You need to have it in hard copy and things like that. So I missed the taxi drivers because I think they were actually standing before we got into the airport building, which I wasn't expecting.
It surprised me when you told me that too, because it's very unusual to see taxi drivers before you see customs.
Well, there was just a load of guys there who seemed to be trying to attract your attention. So right. I think they were taxi drivers. So anyway, I missed those. But
they're basically acting as fixers for helping you through the paperwork, which I've seen in other African airports. I think of Nairobi Airport, for instance, that we wouldn't have made it through with even half our luggage, which is what we made it through with if it hadn't been for one of the fixers who we paid to help us through the chaos there.
Yeah. I can remember when we went to Zanzibar years ago, it was a bit like that as well. It was quite interesting. So anyway, there was a guy standing in the customs area talking to the customs officials, and he seemed to be one of these guys that seemed to know everybody. So I just went up to him and asked him if he knew any taxi drivers, and next thing a taxi driver appeared, and he ended up being our taxi driver. He was pretty insistent that we have him. And it worked out well because he came for us the next day. He took us on a tour. When we flew down to Maheli, he came and picked us up. And yeah, I think once you get a taxi driver at the airport, then unless you're not happy with them for some reason, they will almost insist that they're your taxi driver for however long you're on the island.
Well, and you were not communicating, as I recall, to your taxi driver in English.
No, it is pretty French. The other languages that they speak are Arabic and a local kind of Comorian language, which I think is a version of Swahili, but I'm not sure about that. But anyway, unless you can speak Arabic, you're pretty much in French. We found that certainly the taxi driver and the hotel spoke really very, very little English. So unless you can get by in French, it would be a bit of a struggle.
And yes, the local language, Shikomori, is a Bantu language closely related to Swahili. And Swahili, of course, is of course. There's probably no sentence I should start with. Swahili is, of course, a pidgin language between Arabic and one of the Bantu languages up in Tanzania and Kenya, which isn't that far away. And so this must be another pidgin language, a trading language. I didn't know that. Yeah, as the Arabs went along the coast of Africa, they would trade with the locals and obviously trade with goods coming out of the interior. And the Swahili-based languages or languages like that are pidgin language, which means they're simpler languages.
Oh, wow.
They don't have a lot of, for instance, unlike French, it doesn't have male, female, and neuter. Well, neuter is German, but
Yeah.
so you don't have to worry about those sort of things as you're conjugating your verbs and things. So if I want to say in Swahili, I speak Swahili. If you want to say the word, the phrase "I speak Swahili," Nina sema ki Swahili, that is very easy to just swap out ni, which is me, into ta, which is you, and you don't have to worry about when you go with she and he, you don't have to match verbs and things like that. It's much simpler,
Oh,
and also
wow.
a smaller vocabulary because you had the words that you needed to trade.
So you could go to the Comoros and speak Swahili.
Well, I don't know. I guess we don't know how close it is.
Yeah. I think I remember asking our dive guy whether he could speak Swahili, and I can't remember what he said. I seem to remember that there was some similarity, but it wasn't a really close match. But again, I could be wrong on that. I might be misremembering.
Well, and I remember when I was in Tanzania and speaking Swahili, or what little that I remembered, I was saying things like, well, I'm a computer programmer. How do I say that? And it's Nina computer fundi. And it's sort of like, well, what if I was a computer repairman? Same thing. What if I was it's basically like a computer mechanic, and we use that to cover a large variety of things. And again, so a smaller vocabulary, because as a trading language, it didn't need to be as complex. It's obviously grown in complexity over the years as it needed to cover more things. And then it just went and borrowed words from other languages like computer, which is the same thing we do in English when we...
Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's really interesting.
So as you went around the island, you stopped at various beaches and sites and things like that your taxi driver told you wanted to stop at. And so do you know the names, or can you describe any of the places that were memorable along the way?
I can't remember the names, but yeah, every so often he obviously had the set sort of itinerary as you go around the island. So he stopped at 2 or 3 beaches, which were really pretty, nothing terribly dramatic, but the usual kind of sand, tree backdrop, that sort of stuff. We stopped at one beach, and I'm trying to think what that was called, but I can't remember. It was famous in a sort of bad way, in the sense that was the beach that I think there was, it was the mid-80s or mid-90s, I think. There was an Ethiopian airliner that was hijacked. And the 2 guys on board tried to get the pilot to fly to Australia, and ignored the fact that they didn't have anything like enough fuel to try to get to Australia. The pilot tried to, I think he tried to go down the coast to begin with, and they spotted it. They could still see land, so they'd worked out that wasn't Australia. So he set off and tried to get to Moroni and tried to land there. And he really, really nearly made it. But then there was some sort of bust up, and he ran out of fuel. And so he tried to touch down in the bay there, and he was really unlucky. He just sort of caught a wingtip just as he was coming in. It cartwheeled the plane. Even so, I think that some people made it out alive. And it was a pity, because I think the biggest cause of death was because people inflated their life jackets before they got out of the plane. So that's the origin of when you're in a plane and they say, if we land on water, you put your life jacket on, but don't inflate it so you get out of the plane. So that stems back to that hijacking.
It was 1996. It was more recent than you were
96,
thinking.
yeah. So I could say they were lucky. I mean, you would be pretty unlucky if you were on the plane.
Right.
But they were lucky in the sense that there were some French divers in the bay. They got a rescue operation going quite quickly. And really weirdly, it's actually on film, because there was a tourist on the beach who, in the account of it, said that she thought it was some sort of air show for tourists, which just sounds completely ridiculous. But anyway, she started filming it. So the whole crash is actually on film. So we saw that beach. As I say, 2 or 3 others that look pretty. The last one that we stopped at was obviously a big beach place for the local people to go as well. There was little huts that obviously could sell food and that sort of stuff. Then about the only other thing that we stopped to look at, there was what looked like a water-filled caldera, because there was a little lake just very, very close to the shoreline, but almost completely circular and filled with water. According to the taxi driver there, some American scuba diver had gone into that to try and find out how deep it was, and had never been seen again. So I suppose it was quite a macabre trip around the island in some respects. I tried to find out a bit more about that lake and see if that story was true, but I couldn't find anything on the internet, so I don't know. But anyway, that was his story. So that was about it, really. And then he stopped to show us one or two other things. I think one of the big exports for the island, and I can't pronounce this properly, is it Lang Lang or something? It's Ylang. But anyway, it's ingredient in perfume, I think, including Chanel number 5. So that's one of the kind of main exports, I think, from the island. And we were driving along and he just stopped and went to this tree and yanked off a branch and gave us it. And it smelled absolutely gorgeous. That was quite nice to see that. I think in that sense, the island's probably similar to Madagascar, where it's spices and that kind of perfume base, however you say it.
Interesting. I'll have to bookmark that. I'm not aware of Liang Liang.
I'm probably saying it wrong again, but I think that's how you spell it.
I have it spelled that way. I have no idea how to pronounce it. How do you pronounce a French Arabic word? So, and you mentioned food and little stands by the beaches and such. I'm expecting seafood would be predominantly what would be in the diet here in Comoros.
Yeah, when we went down to the lodge at Mahali, we ate a huge amount of seafood. But yeah, there is a lot of seafood and a little bit of chicken, but not much else. So yeah, very much seafood diet. Mm-hmm. We were actually there at New Year's Eve. We went out for dinner in Moroni. I got my French wrong and I thought I was ordering prawns, and I ended up with the biggest lobster that I'd ever seen. So yeah, you've got a good choice of that sort of stuff there.
Excellent. Anything else we want to talk about on Grand Comore before we head over to the other island where you were doing your diving?
I think that's probably about it.
And I keep saying the other island, Mohole.
There's Anjouan and Moheli. And again, I'm saying the French or the anglicised terms. They've all got names in the local language as well, but I'm not even going to attempt to try them there.
Moale. Okay, got it.
Yeah. That's got a hotel on it called Laka Lodge, which is, I think, pretty much the best place in Comoros. And when we got to the airport, the customs people kind of expected that we were staying there. And on the trip around the island, we bumped into the guy who was actually the UNICEF ambassador and his wife, and they were there, and we stopped to talk to them, and they'd been there and they'd had a great time. So I think anybody that goes into the area is going to find themselves at Laka Lodge at some point.
Well, and it's about 30, 40 miles away from Grand Comore, and you took a boat there, or?
We flew there. Okay. I think there's about 3 airlines that fly there, and we flew Abi Aviation.
So this is one of those shortest flights in the world sort of things.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, it was amazing when we were on it, because we got going and then steward and stewardess jumped up and we got a bottle of water and a little packet of strawberry custard creams. And that was more than you'll get on some flights. And then they gave us another little bag with a T-shirt and a baseball cap and stuff, and I was thinking, God, this is really good. But I hadn't really thought about it, but it was actually New Year's Day we were flying. I think that was a New Year's Day special, because we said to some other people in the hotel, oh, did you get the baseball cap? And they just looked blankly. So I think that was a New Year's Day treat. But we were going to fly back as well, but the flights are unreliable. You do have to be careful about that when you book your flights, because they cancelled flights in and out of Moali for the few days towards the end of our stay. And we weren't sure why. We heard it was maybe because there was no fire trucks there, which is perfectly possible. So we ended up getting the hotel boat back, which was really nice because it was a lovely day and it was a great way to travel. But the hotel weren't really keen on doing transfers that way. So if there was a lot of you coming across, you might have been able to persuade the hotel to bring the boat across for you. But generally, they were keener on you flying.
Well, and you mentioned, we talked about this last time, strange sense of deja vu in this interview, that when you arrived back to Grand Comore, you didn't just pull up to the dock and get out.
Oh, no. I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting that. I thought we would just tie up at this wooden jetty and that would be great, but we didn't. It was just at the southernmost part of the island, and that was it. And so we took the boat in as close as we could, but I think it was low tide. And so we had to get out really far from the shore. And it was a mixture of sort of rocks and seaweed and dead coral. And because we were flying that same day, we dressed conservatively. So I had trousers. In fact, I think we all had trousers on. So I had to try and roll my trousers up to my knees to stop them getting absolutely saturated. And it was really slippy. And it was quite a long way to walk. And of course, we had all our suitcases as well. But I mean, that wasn't so bad for us. It wasn't great for the guys on the boat because sort of typical African, up on the head and off they went. So it must have been really unpleasant for them carrying them that far. And then when we got up to the shore, that was obviously the jumping off point for everybody, because pretty much all of the locals, I think, who travelled between the islands travelled by these little boats. Some of them were really small. So that was everybody going and coming there. So there was huge crowds of people, and all the shade was gone. And our taxi that was coming to pick us up was a while before it came to get us. So it was a bit of a shock after. We had a lovely boat ride between the islands because it was a glorious day, and that was lovely. But then when we actually got back to the island, it was pretty horrible. The road from the southern part of the island back up to Moroni is really pretty dreadful. So I can see in that sense as well why the hotel suggested that you actually fly rather than get the boat.
Well, and you said a couple of things that I want to put together here. You said that the first hotel you had was the only one with air conditioning, and you said that all the shade was gone when you got back. So it was hot. And you also said it was New Year's or close to New Year's now, the week after that you're coming back here. So I want to put that on people's calendar. You're in the southern hemisphere, so you're in the middle of summer and not all that far from the equator. No, you're not. You're still in the tropics, though.
Yeah. No, it was. I think it was reasonably. I've been in sort of hotter places, but it was about, I think, probably 31, 32 degrees, something like that. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit.
90s.
And reasonably humid. Again, I've been in places with greater humidity, but it could be a bit sticky. And we were quite lucky with the weather, actually, because the hotel told us that the week before it had rained so much that they'd had to bail out the hotel boats. And I think people were stuck in their rooms. So you would have to think about that. I mean, I tend to be a little bit optimistic when places say, oh, it's the rainy season, because I've been to Thailand when the rainy season, and you might get a really short downpour for a little bit of time and then it's fine. But there, the week before we were there, it was proper wet. And I think if you were in Moelle in the rain, then I think time could hang heavy on your hands after a while.
Well, I suspect the rain would have been a little warmer than you get up in Scotland, though, too. So I'm not sure that you would have dealt with it the same way as everyone else would have. So, and then we haven't described, you went off to Mahole and you went to dive. The diving was...
Oh, the diving was great. The diving was absolutely superb. Some of the best equipment that I have ever dived with in a rental place. In fact, probably the best equipment that I've dived with in a rental place. I think the biggest group of us that went diving at any time was 5 of us, but usually there was 2 of us and a dive leader. The water was clear. There was lots to see. There was nobody else around. It was great. It was a really nice place to go diving. There's actually a marine park off the coast of Moelle and Laka Lodge, and it was that marine park that we were diving in. So I'm not quite sure what the marine park connotation gives. I think it probably prevents some of the more intrusive fishing and things like that. I know that our dive master, Yusuf, who came from actually the village next door to the place, he was talking about boats from other countries coming along and being really quite harmful in terms of their fishing practices, and particularly targeting things like sea cucumbers and just dredging the bottom and absolutely stripping the area of life. So I would hope that that marine park protects at least from that sort of stuff.
Well, and unlike some marine parks, which are all underwater, this is a series of islands off the coast, small islands.
Yeah. Again, you can see the volcanic origins. I mean, there was one bit that we were diving around. It was really clearly kind of parts of a sunken caldera. So really pretty.
Excellent. Well, and I think we were talking before about what the resort looked like that you were at. And to me, I think the closest thing in terms of physical look was Tahiti, in terms of volcanic islands, white sand beaches, and palm trees.
Yeah, I've never been to Tahiti, but I've seen the pictures, and yeah,
you and me both.
Yeah, it does look quite similar. I mean, the beach was a nice beach. There was generally hardly anybody on it. You had some small bungalows set back from the beach, which was the accommodation, one or two sort of slightly bigger houses, and then a common area where you had all your meals. But it was very, very simple. I mean, the accommodation is comfortable, but the accommodation, again, is pretty simple. And you're right on the edge of the water. And then, again, with kind of green, heavy forest behind you. And again, quite a mountainous island as well. And we didn't do it. We were pretty lazy, but the hotel did do trips. You could go hiking in the forest, go and see waterfalls, that sort of stuff. And they would take you. There was a lot of turtles, huge number of turtles. Particularly in the morning, you could easily just stand at the beach and see 15 turtles coming up for air. You'd see them sticking their head up above the water, or at least 15 times you could see turtles breathing in the space of 10 minutes, something like that. You could also go for a trip to see the turtles laying their eggs at another part of the island. And I think, as I said before, the hotel would also take you for a walk around the neighbouring village as a bit of a trip out if you wanted to do that.
Okay. Well, and we're talking about an accommodation that is not a backpacker budget, but you don't have to be a internet millionaire either, somewhere in between.
No, yeah. I mean, it's really expensive by Comoros standards,
Right.
but it's reasonable by others. It's maybe not quite as flash as you might get on one or two other countries.
Right.
And it is all meals a day. So, I mean, you can't go anywhere else. So it's breakfast, lunch and dinner. And as I said earlier, you do get a lot of fish. The menu was written on a blackboard at the beginning of every day, and it was always fish of some description for lunch and dinner. And I think the first day we got there, it was still quite busy because it was the tail end of the Christmas holidays, busy by resort standards. By the time we left, I think there was probably 3 parties there. So there was a few more people when we got there, and we heard this Austrian guy saying, "I just don't want fish, anything but fish." And we thought, oh, that's a bit ridiculous. We won't be like that. And I think about by the 4th or 5th day or something, we just cracked and had to ask for chicken because it was good. And it was a variety of fish cooked in a variety of ways, but we just couldn't cope with any more fish. They would come around every morning and say, "Is it okay?" And you could say, "No, I want fish. I want pork or chicken or whatever." And they would accommodate you as best they could. And the cooking was pretty good, really, and a nice mixture of things that you might get anywhere, then some local dishes thrown in as well, some local breads and some other local dishes, which I'm struggling to remember. But it was nice. It was a nice mixture. And good ice cream, which was a really unexpected thing. They made their own ice cream, which was just great.
Excellent. Well, and I think we've kind of talked about your itinerary now. You were standing at the prettiest spot you saw in Comoros. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Probably for me, I just like being on a dive boat in the sunshine. Looking for manta rays was probably one of the prettiest things. Although sitting on the beach at sunset as well was probably a close second.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Comoros.
I think for that, it was probably when the president came to stay in the hotel.
Okay.
We didn't expect that. He came reasonably often, apparently, and it was a big deal when he did. We had to do a bit of shuffling of rooms because his entourage obviously wanted the better rooms. Then his security people turned up in advance, and that was about the only time we really saw like blackened out big SUVs, that sort of stuff. It's interesting, actually, because I think the island up until the mid-70s was probably the most politically unstable, and I think it had coup after coup after coup.
Oh, wow.
So I guess if you're the president, you probably still have to take your security a bit seriously. But he eventually got there about 9 o'clock or something and did a tour of the dining room as well. And there was a Polish couple there and the man asked for a selfie. So there was the president standing in the middle of the dining room posing for selfies. So I should imagine that there's not many places that's going to happen.
Now, the whole population of Comoros is about 850,000 people. So translate president to whatever your local leader of that kind of group, whether that's your governor or your, in my case, mayor.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And then if you had to summarize Comoros in just 3 words, Fiona, what 3 words would you use?
I think probably hot, first of all, which is stating quite a lot of the obvious. But most places you go that are hot, you get breaks with aircon and stuff like that. Aircon in cars, aircon in hotels, that type of stuff. You just didn't get that. So it was just pretty much unremittingly hot. Then secondly, I guess foreign. because there was very few other tourists. There was very few concessions to tourists at all. So it did feel as if you were somewhere definitely strange, if you like. And then thirdly, the only thing that I can think of really is surviving, because it's these people living out in the middle of the ocean on these volcanic lumps. They're surviving, doing well out of it.
Well, and one of the questions I sometimes ask, and your answer sort of leads me in that direction, is when did it feel furthest from home? When did it feel most strange or foreign?
Probably when we got out of the airport in Moali, because you assume that things are going to run as you want them to and as you've planned. We got out of the airport and we expected somebody to be there from the hotel to meet us, and there was nobody there to meet us. We were by this kind of fairly tatty looking building surrounded by local people, couldn't really speak the language. It was baking hot. Didn't have a phone signal, didn't know how we could contact anyone, couldn't see anybody that you could think you could remotely go up to say, can you help here? And just for about 10 minutes or so, there was just that feeling of suddenly thinking, might not go as well as I thought it was going to go here. And then the guy turns up in the car with the hotel logo on the side, and normality kind of gets restored again. But it was just that bit for a while where you thought, what if nobody comes? What do we do?
Yes.
But no, otherwise, I mean, even although it was quite strange, sometimes the surprising thing about being places is just how similar things are.
Right.
You know, how similar people are.
Oh, yeah.
People help you, and it's so a lot of it, even although it wasn't kind of geared up for tourists, talking to the people as best we could, they had the same views. They had the same views about their politicians, about the government, the way things were run. More similarities and differences, really.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, our guest again has been Fiona Jones, and there's no truth to the rumor that I did this again just because I like to listen to Fiona's Scottish accent. But I do, and I did enjoy both times we've done this. And so, Fiona, thank you for your patience, and thank you for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for the island nation of Comoros.
Thank you. Absolutely pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chris.
In news of the community, first a thanks to those people who are patrons of the show through Patreon, especially to our newest patron, Justin Barnes. Thanks so much for those of you who are supporting Amateur Traveler. I heard from Vincent as a comment on the Facebook page today about the episode we did on Brittany in France, one of the recent episodes, who said it was a real quick tour. You missed a lot of nice cities like Concarneau, Vannes, and Dinard. And I'm not even Breton. And absolutely, we will miss things in every episode. And part of that is definitely my fault, as I encourage the people who are coming on the show to focus in on a 1-week itinerary. I'm really making them choose some of their favorite things. So we're hoping this will be the beginning of your investigation in going to a destination, and not necessarily the last word, but I'm still hoping the content that we're putting out is helping you with your planning, especially in this time where we're planning a little further ahead than we sometimes do. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
And by the time we do it the third time, it's going to be perfect.
Oh, no, because there was bits of that I was thinking, that sounded really stupid. It was much better the first time.
No, it was good.